Hello, I'm Stefan Graeber. I'm the project leader for LXD, and today I'd like to talk a bit about images. All LXD containers and virtual machines are created from an image. Typically, that's an image that we publish on our image server that the LXD command line tool will instruct LXD to download and then create an instance for you. LXD then takes care of things like caching and updating those images in the background to make things start as fast as possible. These days, we're publishing images for about 26 different Linux distributions. This is our image server. You can see a very, very long list of Linux distributions and releases and architectures. And some of those are just for containers, some of those are images for containers and virtual machines. But all in all, we're generating hundreds of images every single day. There are two common variants for those images. The default is a pretty lightweight image for that given Linux distribution. And there's a slightly larger version, which is our cloud variant, which includes cloud init and lets you feed it configuration the same way you would with a cloud instance. Now, what we're doing now is adding a third instance image variant, effectively, which is going to be desktop. And those are going to be for virtual machines only because they don't make sense for containers. Containers don't have a video card, they don't have a full graphics output that can render an entire desktop environment, but virtual machines do. And a few weeks back, I started a forum thread on a community forum asking people like whether it would be useful for them to be able to easily create a desktop virtual machine from a number of Linux distributions. Overall, the feedback has been quite positive, and so I'll spend a bit of time this week to try and make it work. And here we go. So I'm going to move over to a terminal, and I'm going to be looking at the first couple of those images. The first Linux distribution that supports it is Ubuntu, and for this I'm going to be using the Ubuntu development release. No particular reason there. I could use an older release. We also have desktop images for them, but I figured it's just more interesting because it's all nice and bleeding edge. So let's call that instance Ubuntu. It needs to be a virtual machine. I'm going to be setting up 4 CPUs and 4 gigs of RAM. It's a desktop environment, so it makes sense to feed it a bit more resources. And what does I have? Yeah, and lastly, console equals VGA, just so that we immediately get the video output once the instance is created. So it will now download the image. This image is quite large. Desktop images are going to be over a gig in size in general. That's just the way they are. So for a container image, we can make an image of about 200 megs, maybe, sometimes less. With a VM image, they tend to go closer to 500 megs because you need to include like a full kernel bootloader, a bunch of drivers, firmwares, all that kind of stuff. And in this case, with an entire desktop environment, the image easily grows by another 500 or 600 megs, and that's going to depend on the different distros. In the case of Ubuntu, we're building the standard Ubuntu desktop using GNOME shell, and Ubuntu has a desktop that's called Minimal, which just gets GNOME shell with a web browser. So that's what's being used here. Other distributions don't have that, and so the desktop environment is far larger because it might include things like LibreOffice, might include a whole lot of other pieces of software. Because the image is so large, it also takes a significant amount of time to actually unpack it, in this case into a ZFS storage pool. Just like with any of our other images, only the initial creation is slow. Any additional instance you create from that same image is going to be near instantaneous because it gets to benefit from copy on write at the file system level. So this should be done pretty soon, hopefully. And then I'm going to be attached to the VM. The thing that's particularly interesting here compared to an approach like what I did in the last video with Windows 11 is that you don't need to install it. Like it is pre-installed, it will just start and work. Anyway, the VM just started now, so I'm going to be switching things over on my side to share that window. Let's do that. Remote viewer and okay. So let's switch over to that and then resume the start of the VM so we can see what's going on. All right, so that's LXD VM starting up, getting into grub, and boot screen, but that Ubuntu installs a bit verbose on startup. And there we go. We're inside a freshly installed Ubuntu environment. You can just skip this, just close this first start thing. Great, there we go. So that's Ubuntu desktop. The VM starts, logs the user in immediately. If we look at the terminal, we're gonna see that we are logged in as the Ubuntu user. That user has root access through sudo, and it comes in this case with Firefox pre-installed. And yeah, I can see that everything is working just fine. So if we go on the forum, for example, this is loading up. There's internet access. Everything is good. So this one is for Ubuntu. Now let's switch back to the terminal. And I'm gonna close this window, reset the terminal. And the other one that's been done is archlinux. So archlinux is a bit different because they don't really have a default desktop environment. So as a result, the variant there is called desktop-gnome. I'll just call the instance archlinux. The other difference with archlinux is that it is not signed with a valid secure boot key, which means we need to disable secure boot so that the VM can actually boot. So security.secureboot equals false, and again, console VGA. And it's gonna take another little while to download that image, which I believe is a bit larger than the Ubuntu one. But yeah, while that's going on, the intention is that like all of those desktop images we're making will just boot, log in immediately into a functional user session. And so you get to experience that Linux distribution's desktop environment immediately. You don't need to go through the install process. You don't need to do any of that. Can get it set up really quickly. Can play with it. Can throw it away. It's really meant to be nice and easy. The only real downside is the size of the images. That's gonna take up a bunch of space on your machine and quite a bit of bandwidth as they download or update. While this one is starting up, I guess we can just reattach to the Ubuntu one to just take a look around. So just reattaching here and getting the screen share working again. Windows capture, Ubuntu. Yep. And here we go. So in the case of the Ubuntu desktop, as I mentioned, it's using a minimal install. So you're gonna see very little software actually being installed. The other benefit of those pre-made images is that they're refreshed every day. So if you want to look at what the development version of some Linux distribution looks like right now, you can just create a new instance from that image, and you don't really need to think about it too much and deal with package updates and all that stuff. All right. So let me just switch back to the terminal and reconfigure this screen share because archlinux just finished creating. Okay, switching to arch there, and let's let it boot. So again, we're inside the VM firmware, getting into grub and booting it up, and we're done. It's extremely fast, which is quite nice to see. Like it literally takes seconds to get to a working desktop. As I mentioned, archlinux has a few more default applications than Ubuntu does. If we look at the list of applications, so yeah, there we go. So it's got like all of the default GNOME components. So you've got contacts, weather, maps, photos, videos, all of that stuff, which the Ubuntu minimal install doesn't have. It doesn't come with Firefox, but comes with the Epiphany, I believe it's called, the GNOME web browser instead. But same result, like it boots very quickly, it has network connectivity immediately, you get to have a working environment. And if we go inside the terminal, same deal. You can do sudo and get root access and install whatever you want. So pretty much the exact same experience, and we're looking at replicating that with the other Linux distributions that we're looking at adding. What's it called? System something. Yeah, system monitor. So just to take a quick look, as you can see, the VM does have 4 CPUs. It's got the 4 gigs of RAM, and it is using 1 gig right now. So the default VM size of LXD, which gives it a gig of RAM, would be really, really tight. That's why we need to bump it, as I did here. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. We've got those two available. I'm looking at doing Fedora next. We might do some other distros. I'm sure we're going to be getting a lot of requests for different desktop environments and different distributions. One thing that's worth keeping in mind is that to us, that's going to be using 1.5 gig and about an hour or so of build time for every single image we do. So when we do a distro and we do multiple releases, like has been the case with Ubuntu and like will be with Fedora, that can take up a lot of build time on our side and a lot of disk space both on our side and on the mirrors. So we're going to be keeping a pretty close eye on download statistics on those images, and we will very likely be cutting off images that, you know, only get a couple downloads a week or something like that, because that's just going to be too much effort for us to actually maintain those. That being said, all of those images are built using Distro Builder, so you can totally build your own locally for whatever you want, as well as customize them in whichever way you feel like. And that's it for this pretty short video on our new desktop images. Those two are available right now to all LXD users on our image server. As I said, Fedora should be available soon, and then we'll look at what other distros we'll do next. So if you've got any feedback on this, you can use our distribution community forum to give us some feedback there, or you can use the comments here on YouTube. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.